You've been told that discipline is about waking up at 5 a.m., grinding harder, optimizing every hour of your day. But what if discipline isn't about doing more? What if it's about becoming still enough to hear what you've been running from? The mind that screams the loudest is often the one that's never been listened to. Eastern philosophy teaches that enlightenment through pain doesn't come from silencing the chaos. It comes from sitting with it until it reveals what it's been trying to say all along. Most people spend their entire lives fighting their inner noise, meditating to escape it, working to drown it, distracting themselves into oblivion. But the Buddhists knew better. Suffering and awakening aren't enemies. They're the same door, seen from different sides. This isn't another productivity hack. This isn't another self-help formula. This is about the kind of discipline that doesn't shout, the kind that listens, the kind that doesn't force, the kind that flows. Shadow work, trauma healing, spiritual transformation, they all point to the same truth. You don't silence inner chaos by winning the war. You silence it by ending the fight. Wu Wei, the Taoist art of effortless action, teaches that the river doesn't struggle to reach the ocean. It just moves. And somewhere along the way, resistance becomes rhythm, noise becomes stillness, and the mind finally learns to rest. What you're about to hear isn't theory. It's a map, a journey from the chaos you're living in to the silence you've forgotten exists. From the discipline that exhausts you to the discipline that frees you. From the noise that never stops to the space between thoughts where real peace lives. Zen philosophy, psychology of pain, meditation and suffering, they're all woven into this story because they're all woven into you. And if you've ever felt like you're doing everything right but still feel lost, this is for you. Because sometimes the loudest thing you can do is stop talking. And the strongest thing you can do is stop fighting. You don't need to be fixed. You just need to be heard. And the first person who needs to hear you is you. This video isn't about becoming someone else. It's about remembering who you were before the noise convinced you that you were broken. So take a breath, let the urgency fall away, and for the next few minutes, just listen. Because what you're searching for isn't out there. It never was. It's in the silence you've been too afraid to enter. And that silence is where everything begins. Jason sat at his desk, staring at a blank screen. But the real chaos wasn't in the blueprints. It was in the space between his thoughts. The mind has a voice, and when left unchecked, it doesn't whisper, it screams. Eastern philosophy calls this the monkey mind. Restless, reactive, always swinging from branch to branch, never landing. Jason's mornings began with anxiety he couldn't name, a background hum of suffering and awakening that felt both urgent and empty. He'd scroll through his phone, chasing distraction, but the noise only grew louder. The Buddhists understood this thousands of years ago. Samsara isn't just the cycle of rebirth. It's the loop you live every single day when you refuse to sit still. Jason didn't know it yet, but his emotional pain wasn't the problem. It was the messenger. The psychology of pain teaches us something the self-help industry won't admit. Discomfort is information. When your chest tightens, when your thoughts race, when you can't seem to rest, that's not failure. That's the mind-body connection signaling that something's out of alignment. Jason had ignored this signal for years, treating his inner noise like background static. But the body doesn't lie. Trauma healing begins not with solutions, but with recognition. The Taoists speak of Wu Wei, the art of effortless flow, but you can't flow when you're fighting the current. Jason's mistake wasn't that he felt chaos. It was that he tried to outrun it. He filled his calendar, his evenings, his weekends, believing that busyness was the antidote to emptiness. But the river doesn't stop because you refuse to look at it. It just keeps moving, waiting for you to step in. Zen philosophy offers a different approach. Don't fight the noise, don't feed it, just observe it. Imagine sitting in a temple where every sound echoes: footsteps, wind, the creak of old wood. At first, it's overwhelming, but if you stay long enough, the sounds stop being intrusions. They become part of the stillness. Jason didn't understand this yet. He thought silence meant the absence of sound. He didn't realize that true inner stillness isn't about control. It's about non-attachment. The mind will always produce thoughts. The question isn't whether they arise, it's whether you believe them. Shadow work, the Jungian practice of facing the hidden parts of yourself, begins here, in the willingness to hear what you've been running from. Jason's inner noise wasn't random. It was his ego dissolution trying to happen, his self-awareness knocking on the door, his soul begging for attention. Most people live their entire lives in reaction mode, startled by thoughts, ruled by impulses, believing every story the mind tells. This is the root of spiritual transformation, the moment you stop identifying with the noise. Buddhism teaches that enlightenment through pain isn't about suffering less, it's about suffering consciously. Jason had been practicing meditation and suffering without knowing it. Every time he resisted a thought, every time he judged himself for feeling anxious, he was deepening the wound. The sword, in Bushido, isn't just a weapon. It's a mirror. It reflects what you bring to it. If you approach it with fear, you see danger. If you approach it with clarity, you see truth. Jason's inner chaos wasn't the enemy. It was the teacher he refused to meet. And until he stopped running, the lesson would keep repeating. The call of inner noise isn't a malfunction. It's an invitation. But most people never RSVP. They medicate it, numb it, drown it in Netflix and work and anything that keeps them from sitting still. Jason was no different. He thought discipline meant grinding harder, optimizing more, becoming someone else. But the Taoists knew better. The way forward isn't through force. It's through surrender. Not giving up, surrendering the illusion that you can control the wind. You can't stop the mind from screaming, but you can stop believing that the scream is you. Detachment doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop clinging to the noise as if it were truth. And that's where the real discipline begins, in the space between the thought and the reaction, where impermanence whispers, "This too shall pass." Jason decided he'd fix himself the way he fixed buildings, with a plan, a timeline, and sheer willpower. He downloaded 3 meditation apps, bought a book on mindfulness, and set his alarm for 5 a.m. The ego loves projects, especially ones where it gets to play the hero. For 2 weeks, he sat cross-legged on his living room floor, eyes closed, jaw clenched, trying to force his mind into submission. But the thoughts didn't stop. They multiplied. Eastern philosophy warns about this trap. The harder you chase stillness, the faster it runs. Jason didn't realize he was doing spiritual transformation wrong, not because he lacked discipline, but because he was using discipline as a weapon against himself. The ego doesn't surrender through force. It surrenders through exhaustion. The resistance of the ego is subtle, cunning, dressed in good intentions. Jason told himself he was working on himself, but really he was trying to become a version of himself that didn't feel so human. Buddhism teaches that suffering comes from attachment. But what about attachment to the idea of being healed? Jason was clinging to an image, the calm man, the centered man, the one who never felt emotional pain. This is where shadow work becomes essential. Jung said the shadow isn't just the darkness you hide, it's everything you refuse to be. Jason's shadow wasn't his anxiety. It was his inability to accept that anxiety was part of him. He wanted enlightenment through pain, but without the pain. He wanted the temple, but didn't want to climb the mountain. The Taoists call this fighting the current, and the current always wins. There's a reason why so many people quit meditation after a few days. It exposes the one thing the ego can't tolerate: powerlessness. Jason sat there every morning, watching his thoughts spiral, and felt like a failure. I'm doing it wrong, he'd think. I'm not calm enough. I'm not spiritual enough. But Zen philosophy teaches the opposite. There's no doing it wrong. The practice isn't about achieving a state. It's about witnessing the resistance itself. When Jason tried to control his thoughts, he was practicing ego dissolution without knowing it, not because he succeeded, but because he kept failing. Every failed attempt was the ego losing its grip, piece by piece. The mind-body connection doesn't respond to commands. It responds to presence. And presence can't be forced. It can only be invited. Here's where most people give up. They mistake resistance for failure. Jason thought his racing thoughts meant meditation wasn't working. But the Buddhists knew better. The noise gets louder before it gets quieter. Karma and rebirth aren't just metaphysical concepts. They're psychological patterns. Every unprocessed thought, every suppressed emotion, every avoided conversation, they all come back. Not as punishment, but as opportunity. Jason's inner chaos wasn't sabotaging his practice. It was the practice. The psychology of pain reveals this truth. Avoidance creates more suffering than the original wound. When you finally sit still, everything you've been running from shows up. And the ego, terrified of being seen, will do anything to make you stand up and leave. It'll tell you you're too busy, too broken, too far gone. But that's just the resistance talking. Jason didn't know it yet, but his struggle was the beginning of something deeper. The Bushido Code speaks of mastery through repetition, not because repetition makes you perfect, but because it strips away everything that isn't essential. Every morning Jason sat and failed. He was carving away a layer of illusion. Non-attachment doesn't mean you stop trying. It means you stop needing the outcome. Detachment isn't cold, it's free. Jason was learning slowly that discipline isn't about taming the mind. It's about sitting with the untamable and not running away. The wind doesn't ask permission to blow. The river doesn't apologize for flowing. And the mind will do what it does. The only question is, will you keep showing up even when it feels like nothing's changing? Because that's where impermanence hides its gift. In the space between effort and surrender, where self-awareness begins to bloom. 3 months in, something shifted. Jason stopped expecting miracles. He stopped timing his sessions, stopped checking if he felt different, stopped treating meditation like a performance review. He just sat every morning, same corner, same cushion, same chaos in his head. But now, the chaos felt different, not quieter, just less personal. Eastern philosophy teaches that enlightenment through pain isn't a destination, it's a posture. Jason was learning to hold his suffering without trying to fix it. The repetition itself became the refuge, not because it solved anything, but because it gave him a place to return to when everything else felt unstable. Discipline, he realized, wasn't about control. It was about consistency in the face of uncertainty. And that consistency, that was starting to feel like prayer. The Taoists say, nature doesn't hurry, yet everything is accomplished. Jason had spent years hurrying, through projects, through relationships, through his own emotions. But sitting still every morning taught him something the architecture books never mentioned. There's power in doing one thing, over and over, without needing it to be different. Buddhism calls this practice dana, the discipline of showing up without attachment to results. When you water a plant, you don't demand it grow faster, you just water it. Jason began to see his meditation practice the same way. Some days his mind was a storm, other days a whisper, but he showed up anyway. And in that showing up, something ancient stirred, a kind of self-awareness that didn't come from insight, but from endurance. The mind-body connection isn't forged in a single revelation. It's built in the unremarkable repetition of choosing presence over escape. This is where most spiritual seekers get it wrong. They think transformation happens in the breakthrough, but shadow work teaches us that real change happens in the boring middle, the part nobody talks about, the part that doesn't look good on Instagram. Jason wasn't glowing, he wasn't healed. He was just less afraid of his own mind. Zen philosophy speaks of the temple not as a place, but as a practice. You don't visit the temple once and leave enlightened. You return again and again until the temple becomes you. Jason's living room corner wasn't sacred because of what happened there. It was sacred because he kept coming back. Trauma healing doesn't happen in a single cathartic moment. It happens in the 1,000 small decisions to stay present when every instinct screams to run. And Jason was learning to stay. There's a concept in Wu Wei called effortless action. Not laziness, but flow. Jason wasn't there yet. His practice still felt like effort, but the effort was changing. Before it was the effort of control, gripping, forcing, demanding. Now it was the effort of surrender, showing up, breathing, letting go. The sword in Bushido isn't wielded with tension. It's wielded with relaxed precision. Tense muscles are slow muscles. A rigid mind is a fragile mind. Jason was beginning to understand that discipline wasn't about hardening himself against the chaos. It was about softening into it. Impermanence was no longer terrifying. It was clarifying. The thoughts came and went. The emotions rose and fell. And he remained. Not because he was stronger, but because he stopped trying to be anything other than present. Repetition becomes prayer when you stop asking it to save you. Jason wasn't meditating to fix his anxiety anymore. He was meditating because it was the one thing in his life that didn't demand he be different. The psychology of pain reveals this paradox. Healing begins when you stop trying to heal. Non-attachment isn't indifference. It's love without conditions. Jason loved his practice not because it worked, but because it existed. Every morning was a quiet rebellion against the part of him that believed he needed to earn peace. Samsara and nirvana aren't two different places. They're two ways of seeing the same life. Jason was still anxious, still restless, still human, but now there was a thread running through it all. A steady rhythm, a returning, a place inside him that whispered, "You don't have to be perfect. You just have to keep showing up." And in that whisper, something was beginning to awaken. 6 months in, Jason hit a wall he didn't see coming. He was meditating twice a day now, morning and night. He'd added breath work, journaling, cold showers, a rigid sleep schedule. He listened to Dharma talks during his commute, read about Zen philosophy before bed, and started tracking his progress in a spreadsheet. On paper, he was disciplined. In reality, he was drowning. The pursuit of inner stillness had become another form of noise. Eastern philosophy warns about this. The ego doesn't die easily. When you corner it, it adapts. Jason thought he was practicing spiritual transformation, but he'd just replaced one addiction with another. The chaos hadn't disappeared. It had rebranded itself as self-improvement, and the weight of it all was beginning to crush him. This is where shadow work gets uncomfortable. Jason had to face a truth he'd been avoiding. His discipline wasn't about peace. It was about control. Every morning routine, every tracked habit, every book on Buddhism, they were all attempts to build a fortress against the part of him that felt broken. The psychology of pain teaches that we don't heal by doing more. We heal by being more honest. Jason's effort wasn't wrong, but it was blind. He was running so fast toward enlightenment that he couldn't see he was running away from himself. Taoism speaks of Wu Wei, effortless flow. But Jason had turned his practice into a grind. The mind-body connection was screaming at him. Tightness in his jaw, tension in his shoulders, exhaustion that no amount of sleep could touch. His body knew what his mind refused to admit. This wasn't practice, it was performance. The sword, in Bushido, must be sharp, but a blade sharpened too much becomes brittle. Jason had sharpened himself to the point of fracture. He thought more discipline meant more growth, but he'd forgotten the lesson of impermanence. Everything in excess becomes its opposite. Too much control becomes rigidity. Too much effort becomes resistance. Too much self-awareness becomes self-obsession. Jung called this inflation, when the ego, in its quest to transcend itself, becomes bloated with spiritual ambition. Jason wasn't practicing non-attachment. He was attached to the idea of being non-attached. He wasn't seeking detachment. He was performing it, and the performance was exhausting. Emotional pain doesn't disappear when you pile practices on top of it. It just gets buried under noise disguised as discipline. One night, Jason sat down to meditate and couldn't. His body refused. His mind refused. He stared at the wall, breath shallow, and felt something crack inside him. Not dramatically, not cinematically, just quietly, like a thread snapping. He'd been trying so hard to become peaceful that he'd forgotten what peace actually felt like. Buddhism teaches that suffering and awakening are inseparable, but Jason had been treating them like enemies. He wanted the awakening without the suffering, the clarity without the collapse. But that's not how it works. Meditation and suffering aren't opposites. They're partners. The temple isn't a place you escape to. It's the place where you finally stop running. And Jason had been running even while sitting still. His practice had become another way to avoid the truth. He didn't need to do more. He needed to feel more. Here's the paradox nobody talks about. Sometimes discipline becomes the distraction. Jason had turned his healing into a project, his growth into a checklist, his spiritual transformation into a competition with himself. But karma and rebirth don't work on a spreadsheet. Enlightenment through pain doesn't come from achieving more. It comes from releasing the need to achieve at all. The river doesn't try to flow. The wind doesn't plan its direction. And the mind doesn't heal through force. It heals through space. Jason didn't know it yet, but this moment, this exhausted, defeated, empty moment, was the most important one of his journey, because it was the first time he stopped trying to be anything other than tired. The first time he let the noise be noise without needing to silence it. And in that letting go, something deeper began to stir. Not louder, not flashier, just truer. Jason stopped meditating for 3 days. Not out of rebellion, not out of laziness, out of surrender. Real surrender. The kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind that happens when the body finally says, "I can't carry this anymore." He slept in. He sat on his couch without a timer. He stared out the window and let his mind wander without judging it. And something strange happened. The silence found him. Not the silence he'd been chasing. Loud, perfect, Instagram-worthy, but a quieter kind. The kind that exists beneath the effort. Eastern philosophy teaches that enlightenment through pain isn't about winning the fight. It's about realizing there was never a fight to begin with. Jason's strength didn't come from doing more. It came from finally giving up the war. Buddhism speaks of letting go, but most people misunderstand what that means. It's not passive. It's not quitting. It's the active choice to stop forcing outcomes. Jason had been gripping his practice like a man drowning grips a rope, white-knuckled, desperate, terrified of what happens if he lets go. But the Taoists knew, the river carries you better when you stop thrashing. Wu Wei, the art of effortless flow, isn't about doing nothing. It's about doing without resistance. Jason wasn't abandoning his discipline. He was letting it breathe. The mind-body connection responded immediately. His shoulders dropped, his jaw unclenched, his sleep deepened. The body knew what the mind was too stubborn to accept. True strength isn't tension, it's release. Shadow work reveals this truth over and over. The parts of you that you fight the hardest are often the parts trying to save you. There's a concept in Zen philosophy called beginner's mind, approaching each moment as if it's the first time, without expectations, without demands. Jason had lost that. He'd turned his practice into a performance, his healing into a resume. But now, sitting without structure, he remembered what it felt like to just be, not becoming, not improving, just being. Impermanence whispered its lesson again. Everything you cling to will eventually slip away. The routines, the insights, the identity of being someone who meditates, all of it temporary. But the part of him that could witness it all, the part that remained even when everything else fell apart, that part was eternal. Non-attachment doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop mistaking the tools for the truth. Jason's meditation practice wasn't him, it was something he did. And when he stopped confusing the two, space opened up. The psychology of pain teaches that healing isn't linear. Jason had thought he was regressing, skipping practice, loosening his grip, letting things fall apart. But trauma healing doesn't happen on a timeline. It happens in waves. And sometimes, the most healing thing you can do is stop trying to heal. The sword in Bushido is kept sharp, yes, but it's also kept sheathed. A warrior who never rests becomes reckless. A blade that's always drawn becomes dull. Jason was learning to sheath the sword. Not forever, just long enough to remember that his worth wasn't tied to how hard he fought. Spiritual transformation isn't a battle you win. It's a rhythm you find, and rhythm requires rest. The temple doesn't hold meditation every hour. There are pauses, there are silences, there are moments where nothing happens, and that is the practice. Jason sat on his couch, coffee in hand, no agenda, no timer, no expectation. And for the first time in months, he felt something he'd forgotten existed. Peace. Not the peace he'd been chasing, manufactured, controlled, conditional, but the peace that was already there, beneath the noise, beneath the effort, beneath the need to be anything other than exactly this. Buddhism calls this samsara and nirvana in the same breath. The realization that suffering and freedom aren't opposites, they're perspectives. Jason wasn't fixed, he wasn't healed, he was just softer. And in that softness, something new was emerging. Not a new identity, not a new achievement, just a quiet knowing. Strength isn't about how much you can endure. It's about knowing when to stop enduring and start allowing. The body had been begging him to surrender for months. And now, finally, he listened. Jason started noticing something he'd never paid attention to before. The gaps. Not the thoughts themselves, but the space between them. The brief pause after an inhale, before the exhale. The moment between waking and reaching for his phone. The silence that lived underneath the noise. Eastern philosophy has a word for this. Ma, the sacred emptiness. The interval that gives meaning to everything around it. Jason had spent his entire life filling the gaps. With work, with worry, with the next task, the next goal, the next distraction. But now, in his surrender, the gaps began to speak. And what they said wasn't loud, it was just there. Buddhism teaches that enlightenment through pain isn't about finding answers. It's about learning to sit with the questions and the void. The void was full of questions Jason had been too afraid to hear. The psychology of pain reveals that most people fear silence because silence forces them to meet themselves. No distractions, no narratives, no excuses, just you and the raw, unedited truth of who you are. Jason had been running from this his entire life. His busyness wasn't ambition, it was avoidance. His discipline wasn't strength, it was armor. But now, sitting in the space between thoughts, he realized the void isn't empty, it's full. Full of everything you've been too scared to feel, too tired to process, too proud to admit. Shadow work calls this the descent, the moment you stop climbing toward the light and start digging into the dark. Jung said the treasure you seek is guarded by the dragon you fear. Jason's dragon wasn't his anxiety, it was the silence beneath it. The part of him that had always been there, waiting, watching, whispering, "You don't have to keep running." Zen philosophy teaches that the mind is like a mirror. It reflects everything, but holds on to nothing. Jason had been polishing the mirror obsessively, trying to make it perfect, trying to control what it showed. But he'd forgotten the most important part. The mirror doesn't need to be polished. It just needs to be still. When the mind stops moving, when the thoughts settle, what's left isn't emptiness, it's clarity. The Taoists call this inner stillness, but it's not the stillness of death. It's the stillness of a lake at dawn, reflecting the sky without effort, without intention, without need. Jason began to sit not to achieve stillness, but to listen to it. And the more he listened, the more he heard. Not voices, not revelations, just presence. The kind of presence that doesn't demand anything, doesn't promise anything, but holds everything with compassion. This is where meditation and suffering converge. Jason had spent months trying to escape his pain through practice, but now he was learning to listen to it, not to analyze it, not to fix it, just to hear it. Emotional pain, when given space, tells a story. Jason's anxiety wasn't random. It was a signal. His restlessness wasn't a flaw. It was a map. His inner chaos wasn't the enemy. It was the teacher. The mind-body connection works both ways. The body speaks, and the mind listens. But most people spend their lives doing the opposite. The mind shouts commands, and the body suffers in silence. Jason was learning to reverse that, to let the body lead, to trust the pauses, to honor the space between breaths. Impermanence taught him this. Nothing lasts, not even thoughts. So why cling to them? Why believe them? Why let them define you? The void isn't a place you fall into. It's a place you return to. Jason had been terrified of it for so long. The emptiness, the uncertainty, the not knowing. But now, sitting in it, he realized, the void isn't death, it's birth. Every new beginning starts in nothingness. Every creation starts in silence. Every transformation starts in the space where the old self dissolves and the new self hasn't yet formed. Non-attachment, detachment, wu wei. They all point to the same truth. You are not your thoughts. You are the space in which thoughts arise. And that space is infinite. Jason wasn't learning to silence the noise. He was learning to love the silence, to sit in it, to breathe with it, to let it hold him the way a temple holds a prayer. And in that listening, something ancient, something eternal, something unmistakably real began to whisper back. Jason began to see his thoughts differently. Not as truths, not as commands, but as offers. Some thoughts were useful. I need to call my mother. This project needs revision. I'm tired. I should rest. But most thoughts were just noise dressed up as urgency. You're not good enough. You're wasting time. Everyone else has it figured out. These weren't insights. They were echoes, old patterns, inherited fears, Stories he'd been telling himself so long he forgot they were fiction. Eastern philosophy teaches the art of discernment, and Jason was finally learning to wield it. The sword in Bushido isn't used recklessly. It's used with precision. One clean cut. No hesitation. No excess. Jason was learning to cut through the illusory and hold on to the essential. And the difference between the two? It was simpler than he ever imagined. The psychology of pain reveals that most suffering comes not from reality, but from the stories we tell about reality. Jason's anxiety wasn't caused by his workload. It was caused by the belief that his worth depended on his productivity. His restlessness wasn't caused by silence. It was caused by the belief that silence meant emptiness. Buddhism calls this attachment to views, the way we cling to interpretations as if they were facts. Shadow work asks you to examine those views, to hold them up to the light and ask, is this true, or is this just familiar? Jason started doing this in real time. A thought would arise, I'm falling behind. And instead of believing it, he'd pause, he'd breathe, he'd ask, is this essential, or is this noise? Most of the time, it was noise, and the moment he named it, it lost its power. Zen philosophy speaks of cutting the root, not suppressing thoughts, but seeing through them so clearly that they no longer take hold. Jason wasn't fighting his mind anymore. He was observing it. There's a difference. When you fight a thought, you give it energy. When you observe it, you take the energy back. The mind-body connection revealed this to him physically. When he believed a thought, his chest tightened, his breath shortened, his muscles tensed. When he observed it without attachment, his body relaxed. The body always knew what the mind was slow to learn. Not every thought deserves your belief. Not every fear deserves your attention. Not every story deserves to be lived. Spiritual transformation isn't about having fewer thoughts. It's about having a different relationship with them. Jason was no longer the servant of his mind. He was becoming its witness. This is where discipline deepens. It's no longer about routines or repetition. It's about discernment in each moment. The Taoists call this knowing when to act and when to wait. Jason started applying this everywhere. At work, he stopped overcommitting, stopped saying yes to every project out of fear of disappointing someone. In relationships, he stopped over-explaining himself, stopped apologizing for needs that weren't apologies. In his own mind, he stopped entertaining every anxious thought that knocked on the door. Wu Wei, effortless flow, isn't passivity. It's clarity. It's knowing what matters and releasing what doesn't. The sword cuts clean because it doesn't waste movement. Jason was learning to live the same way, not less, just clearer. Not detached, just discerning. Not cold, just precise. There's a moment in every spiritual practice where the tools start to disappear and the truth remains. Jason didn't need a timer anymore. He didn't need an app. He didn't need someone else's Dharma talk to tell him what he already knew. Enlightenment through pain had carved away everything unnecessary, everything performative, everything that wasn't him. What remained was simple: breath, presence, choice. The inner sword wasn't something he picked up, it was something he'd always had. He just hadn't known how to use it. Non-attachment taught him that discernment isn't about rejecting thoughts, it's about not being ruled by them. Impermanence taught him that every thought, every fear, every story, they all pass. And karma and rebirth reminded him, the patterns you don't cut will cut you. So Jason kept the blade sharp, not through aggression, through awareness. And in that awareness, freedom began to take root. Jason used to think strength meant never breaking, never hesitating, never showing doubt. He'd grown up watching men who spoke loudly, acted quickly, filled every room with certainty. But now, sitting in his quiet corner each morning, He was learning a different kind of strength, the kind that doesn't announce itself, the kind that doesn't need to prove anything. Eastern philosophy has always known this. The loudest voice is rarely the wisest. The strongest tree isn't the one that resists the wind. It's the one that bends without breaking. Jason was learning to bend, not out of weakness, but out of wisdom. Buddhism teaches that enlightenment through pain doesn't make you invincible. It makes you flexible. And flexibility, he was realizing, was the deepest form of power he'd ever known. The psychology of pain had taught him something the world never would. Silence isn't the absence of strength. It's the presence of control. When Jason stopped reacting to every thought, every trigger, every provocation, he wasn't being passive. He was being sovereign. Shadow work had shown him that his need to respond, to defend, to explain himself constantly, that wasn't confidence. That was fear. The ego screaming to be seen, to be validated, to matter. But now, in his practice of inner stillness, Jason was discovering something radical. He didn't need to prove anything, not to his colleagues, not to his family, not even to himself. Non-attachment wasn't about not caring. It was about not needing the world to confirm what he already knew. The Taoists call this standing in your own center. Jason was finally learning where his center was. Zen philosophy speaks of the warrior who never draws his sword. Not because he's afraid, but because he's mastered himself so completely that violence becomes unnecessary. Jason wasn't a warrior in the traditional sense, but the principle applied. At work, when someone challenged his ideas, he no longer felt the urge to defend them aggressively. He listened. He paused. He spoke only when he had something worth saying. In arguments, he stopped needing to win. In conversations, he stopped filling every silence with words. The mind-body connection had taught him, tension comes from resistance. When you stop resisting, the body relaxes, the mind clears. And from that clarity, real strength emerges. Not the strength of dominance, but the strength of presence. Not the strength of volume, but the strength of stillness. Impermanence whispered its truth again. Everything loud eventually fades. But silence? Silence endures. Most people mistake serenity for passivity. They think a calm person is a weak person. But Jason was learning the opposite. Spiritual transformation had given him something the world couldn't touch. Equanimity. The ability to remain centered no matter what storm raged around him. Buddhism calls this upekkha, the balance that doesn't waver, the peace that doesn't depend on circumstances. Jason wasn't serene because his life was easy. He was serene because he'd stopped needing it to be. Meditation and suffering had taught him the world will always be chaotic. People will always disappoint. Plans will always fall apart. But the part of him that could witness it all without collapsing, that part was unshakable. Wu Wei, effortless flow, wasn't about forcing outcomes. It was about trusting the process. And trust was the ultimate act of strength. There's a moment in every man's life where he realizes the loudest version of himself was also the most afraid. Jason had been loud for years. Loud opinions, loud routines, loud certainty about who he was and where he was going. But that loudness was a shield, a way to avoid the quiet truths he didn't want to face. Now, in his silence, those truths were impossible to ignore. And the strangest thing? They weren't as terrifying as he thought. Emotional pain, when met with stillness, loses its edge. Trauma healing, when given space, softens. Shadow work, when practiced with compassion, reveals that the parts of you that you feared were often the parts that held the most wisdom. Jason wasn't weak. He'd never been weak. He'd just mistaken noise for power. And now, sitting in the silence he once feared, he was finally becoming the kind of strong that didn't need to shout, Jason's mornings no longer felt like a task. They felt like a return. He'd wake, feet on the cold floor, and move to his corner without thinking. No alarm, no resistance, just movement. The kind of movement that comes not from discipline imposed, but from discipline embodied. Eastern philosophy teaches that mastery isn't something you achieve, it's something you become. Jason wasn't meditating anymore. He was meditation. The practice had dissolved into his life so seamlessly that he couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. Buddhism speaks of right action, not forced, not performed, just aligned. Jason had found his alignment, and it wasn't loud, it wasn't flashy. It was just there, a quiet hum beneath everything, like the invisible sound of a peaceful mind finally at rest. The psychology of pain had come full circle. Jason remembered the chaos he used to live in, the racing thoughts, the sleepless nights, the constant feeling that something was wrong. That version of himself felt like a stranger now. Not because he'd erased it, but because he'd integrated it. Shadow work doesn't eliminate the darkness. It brings it into the light and asks, "What were you trying to protect me from?" Jason's anxiety hadn't been the enemy. It had been a signal. His restlessness hadn't been a flaw. It had been a call. And his silence was the answer. Spiritual transformation doesn't turn you into someone new. It strips away everything that was never you to begin with. What remained in Jason wasn't peace as an absence of struggle. It was peace as the presence of acceptance. Suffering and awakening weren't opposites anymore. They were partners in the same dance. Zen philosophy teaches that the mind at rest doesn't mean the mind is empty. It means the mind is full, but not cluttered. Like a temple after the ceremony ends, candles still burning, incense still drifting, but no noise, no urgency, no grasping. Jason's mind felt like that now. Thoughts still came. Emotions still rose. Challenges still appeared. But they moved through him differently. Non-attachment had taught him that he didn't have to hold on to everything. Detachment had taught him that he didn't have to push everything away. Impermanence had taught him that everything, eventually, would pass. And in that knowing, there was freedom. The kind of freedom that doesn't require escape. The kind that exists right here, in the middle of an ordinary life, in the breath between tasks, in the silence between words. The mind-body connection had become second nature. When tension crept into his shoulders, Jason didn't ignore it. He paused. He breathed. He asked his body what it needed. Sometimes it needed rest. Sometimes it needed movement. Sometimes it just needed acknowledgement. Trauma healing, he'd learned, wasn't a one-time event. It was a daily conversation, a relationship. And like any relationship, it required presence. Wu Wei, effortless flow, had stopped being a concept and started being a lifestyle. Jason didn't force his days anymore. He shaped them. He responded instead of reacted. He chose instead of defaulted. And in that choosing, there was power. Not the kind that dominates, but the kind that sustains. The Taoists were right. The softest water, over time, carves the hardest stone. Jason wasn't grinding anymore. He was flowing. And the flow was carving him into something he'd always been but never knew. There's a sound that only a peaceful mind makes. It's not silence in the way most people think. It's the sound of everything finally aligned. The sound of breath without resistance. The sound of thoughts without attachment. The sound of a life lived not in reaction, but in response. Jason heard it now, every morning, in the space between waking and doing. It wasn't enlightenment in the flashy sense. It wasn't nirvana in the mythical sense. It was just peace, real peace. The kind that doesn't need to be defended because it can't be taken away. Meditation and suffering had walked him to this threshold. Karma and rebirth had shown him that every moment was a choice to begin again. And disciplined silence had become his refuge, his practice, his prayer. Not because it solved everything, but because it reminded him of the one thing the chaos had made him forget. He was never broken. He was just loud. And now he knew how to listen. Jason didn't become someone new. He just stopped pretending to be someone he wasn't. The chaos didn't disappear. It just stopped ruling him. And the discipline? The discipline became so quiet, so natural, that it no longer felt like discipline at all. Eastern philosophy teaches that enlightenment through pain isn't a destination you arrive at. It's a way of walking through the world. Buddhism reminds us that samsara and nirvana exist in the same breath. Suffering and freedom, noise and stillness, chaos and peace. They're not opposites, they're perspectives, and the moment you stop resisting one, the other reveals itself. Jason learned this not through books, not through gurus, but through the simple, unremarkable act of showing up every single day. Non-attachment, wu-wei, inner stillness, they weren't concepts anymore. They were his life. You've walked this path with him. You've seen the resistance, the collapse, the surrender, the silence. And maybe, somewhere in his story, you've seen your own. The part of you that's tired of fighting. The part that's exhausted from performing. The part that just wants to rest but doesn't know how. Shadow work, trauma healing, spiritual transformation. They're not reserved for monks or mystics. They're for anyone brave enough to sit still and listen. The mind-body connection isn't mystical, it's real. Your body has been speaking to you for years. The question is, have you been listening? Impermanence whispers that nothing lasts. Not the pain, not the noise, not even the version of yourself you're clinging to. So why hold on so tightly? Why believe that the chaos defines you? Detachment isn't cold, it's compassionate. It's the wisdom to love yourself without needing to control everything. So here's the question that matters. Do you still fear the silence? Or have you learned to breathe inside it? Because the noise will always be there. The thoughts will always come. The world will always demand more. But you have a choice. You can keep running, keep grinding, keep believing that peace is something you earn through exhaustion. Or you can stop, right here, right now, and realize that the discipline that silences inner chaos isn't about doing more. It's about being more present, more honest, more willing to meet yourself exactly as you are, flawed, tired, human, and still, somehow, whole. Meditation and suffering taught Jason this. Karma and rebirth reminded him that every moment is a chance to begin again. And enlightenment through pain showed him that the wound and the wisdom are the same gift, wrapped differently. There's a truth the Taoists understood deeply. The discipline that destroys you is the same one that sets you free. It all depends on how you wield it. Jason wielded it with force until it broke him. Then he wielded it with stillness, and it freed him. The difference wasn't the discipline itself. It was the relationship he had with it. Wu Wei teaches that effortless flow doesn't mean no effort. It means effort without resistance. And that's the paradox most people never solve. You don't escape the chaos by running faster. You escape it by finally standing still. If this video spoke to something in you, if it touched a place you didn't know needed touching, then don't stop here. There's another piece to this puzzle, another layer to this journey that you need to see. Click on the video. The discipline that destroys you is the same one that sets you free right now. Because what you've learned here is just the beginning. That video will show you how to take this silence, this awareness, this newfound clarity, and turn it into a life you don't need to escape from. Psychology of pain, emotional pain, suffering and awakening. They're not abstract ideas. They're your story. And the next chapter is waiting for you. So don't scroll away. Don't move to the next distraction. Click that video. Watch it now. Let it complete what this one started. Keep walking. The next lesson awaits you.